Ladies and gentlemen, hello. Welcome to those who aren't from MoneySavingExpert.com to MSE Towers. We've never done an event like this before, so we're delighted to have you. And the format's quite simple. Ed's going to start in a moment, then we're going to take questions from the floor, and also we have people here who have questions from Money Saving Expert users about energy. So without a further ado, Ed Davey, Secretary of State for Energy.
Well, thank you, Martin, for that introduction. It's great to be here at MoneySavingExpert.com Towers. I'm sure that's the formal name. But it's good to be the officers, and can I congratulate all the work that MSE does over the years for millions of consumers. It's really an important part of, I think, of the consumer infrastructure of Britain today. So thank you for what you do. And it's also good to see some familiar faces in the audience, and I'm not talking about the press. I'm talking about the big energy saving network people here, because I think what you're doing is really important. Both like MoneySavingExpert.com, your consumer champions. Obviously, MSE.com are focused on saving money for its 15 million online users, not just on energy, but a whole host of other things. But your Cheap Energy Club, I think, is a great tool for alerting people to some of the best deals that are available. But the members of the Big Energy Saving Network operate out in the community. They're providing advice, giving personalised help, and often to the most vulnerable in our society. Working with the voluntary sector that's trusted, helping people get the best deals so people can understand all the things they need to keep their homes warm, keep their energy costs down, and indeed to switch as well. So whether in your cyberspace or whether you're on the streets, you share a common purpose of helping people get good deals. And that's what I really want to talk about today, how we can help people save money and keep warm, and how in government I've sought to ensure that the needs of consumers come first. How in government we're working together with you to help people get the best deals out there to improve their homes and cut their energy bills, and how we've been working to reform the energy system so that it serves the interests of our citizens. Now, to do that, I'm going to paint the picture of how things have changed over the past few years. There's been an awful lot of changes, but I also want to give you an idea how I see the future. Before I do, let me just set out some of the difficulties of the challenges of doing this, because it's not just consumers that one has to worry about doing my job, one has to worry about energy security and also climate change. So we're dealing with a pretty complex problem to balance these needs of these three objectives, the so-called trilemma of keeping the lights on, decarbonising, and making sure energy is affordable for both the public and indeed for business. Of course, when it comes to energy security, I think no one's going to question that it's in the interest of our society that we keep the lights on, we keep the energy that we need for our businesses, our homes, our transport systems, and so on. We are reliant on energy in every aspect of our daily lives. So we've had to drive investment to ensure that power stations get built, the import infrastructure's there, that the distribution networks get built and upgraded, and so on and so forth. And that comes at a cost. You know, power stations are not free, and that cost comes to taxpayers and bill payers. And given that a lot of our coal power stations, a lot of our nuclear power stations have to be replaced anyway because they're coming to the end of their lives, that is a cost that we have to meet, but it's in the interest of society that we do. But I think it's also in the interest of society that we live up to our clean energy commitments, our climate change commitments. Runaway climate change would mean a very harsh and brutal world in the future. And as a father, I do not want that future for my children, and I don't believe any of you would want that future for your children or for future generations. So we have to do everything we can to make sure that our energy system is climate friendly, drive the development of low carbon technology, overhaul our housing stock so it's more energy efficient. And that comes at a cost to taxpayers and bill payers. And we've been very transparent about that. But our job is to make those necessary things happen and do it in the most cost-effective way possible. And actually, over this part, we've reduced the impact of those things on bills. Support for clean energy, for energy efficiency, and help for the most vulnerable now makes up just 7% of the average household's annual energy bill, and that's down from previous years. And we estimate that when you take into account things like the gains made in energy efficiency in people's people's homes and the appliances because of government policies, households are paying on average £90 a year less on their energy bills. Not so much a green tax, but a green dividend from our policies. But over the last decade, as wholesale prices have risen, energy prices have risen pretty much every year. And although they're now coming down again, I can understand why people think that the issue of energy cost has not got the attention it deserves. But I can assure you that helping people with their heat and power and do that at the least possible cost is something that I've been working on from day one in office. It's why we focus on cutting the cost of low carbon energy so it can compete in time without subsidies. It's why we've been working constantly on energy efficiency to help people reduce their bills permanently by improving their homes. And it's why we focus on increasing competition so now people can get out of the clutches of the big six if that means they can reduce their bills. And it's why the Competition and Markets Authority are now doing a full market investigation into energy so that we can really understand if and where people are getting a raw deal. And that was a step that was resisted for years by the big energy companies and ducked by previous governments. And my concern is that ahead of the CMA reporting, Labour seem to have already made their decision. A price freeze, or at least in the latest rebrand, a price cap, now that energy prices are actually falling. But what if the CMA doesn't recommend a freeze or a cap? Would Labour ignore the advice of an independent group of experts who've studied the market for 18 months? That would be government at its worst. Labour have a duty to the British people to take the best advice. Labour have a duty to listen to our premier consumer watchdog. Labour should commit now not to proceed with a freeze or cap unless and until the experts recommend it. Given the early signs from the CMA appear to have already destroyed Labour's energy policy proposals to end vertical integration as a matter of principle and the proposal to reintroduce a pool, I think it's time for Labour to think again before they damage the energy markets we are painstakingly repairing. For back in 2010, our gas and electricity markets were dominated by the big six created under Labour. They had over 99% market share. After a whole series of government and Ofgem initiatives, that's been changing. We've seen 14 new energy suppliers enter the market, and the pre-existing energy minnows have grown. These 21 energy independents are eating into the power of the big six and taking their customers all the time. But this new competition would be the first to suffer if Labour overregulates and doesn't listen to the CMA. In fact, it's vital that all parties listen to the CMA. Nurturing more competitive markets is not easy, it's not quick. To deliver the benefits of competition to consumers requires constant effort by government and regulators and groups like MoneySavingExpert.com and the big energy saving network. Not least because markets develop over time, they are not static. If you look back, it was the last Labour government that took forward the process of energy privatisation started under the Conservatives in the 80s and 90s. Far from over-regulating, the last Labour government lifted price controls and the like. Their failure was to be complacent about competition. Under Labour's reforms, the big six consolidated the market and became excessively powerful. There was little innovation, little imperative to give customers a good and fair service. The tariffs and bill system became so complex that even Stephen Hawking would have struggled to work it all out. The switching system was tortuous, effectively discouraging people from moving supplier. It also meant that even as the prices people paid for their energy rose as wholesale prices rose, there was no reason for the suppliers to compete fiercely on cost or service or value. But slowly and surely we have been turning this around. First, we deregulated to make it easier for new, small, flexible, innovative suppliers to enter the market. There are now, as I said, 21 independent suppliers taking on the big six, 3 times as many as in 2010, and they are aggressively going after customers, offering better and better deals, regularly topping the Best Buy tables, and also regularly topping the customer service tables too. And their market share has therefore grown from under 1% in 2010 to over 10% now, and it's growing all the time as more and more people switch away from the big six. The second thing we did was actually Ofgem's core work, where under their retail market reforms, they aimed to make bills clearer and easier to understand, tariffs simpler, to try to take away some of the fear factor that happens when the bill lands on the doorstep. And I think this will keep getting better. Simple things like putting QR codes on bills will make it easier to compare deals so people can scan them with their smartphone and transfer the data more easily. The My Data project that I was involved in as a Consumer Affairs Minister that we're rolling forward, I think will also assist. You'll be interested to know that the license modifications for QR codes were signed off by my department last week, so they should be on bills by the end of June, and applications will be available to read them. So this technology is going to assist helping people understand their bills and be ready to switch. And as smart meters roll out, people will get near real-time information about their energy use, so they can see what is in their home that's costing them money. I've just come from one of our regular meetings with all the people involved in the rollout of smart meters, and I believe from all the evidence we've seen from the early learning, smart meters will transform the consumer experience as the digital world hits the energy world at long last. But a third thing we've done is to try to revolutionize the switching system. Switching rates fell between 2008 and 2013, partly because doorstep mis-selling was stopped, and because the system that was so slow and cumbersome meant that it took over a month and a half to switch. So I've been challenging the energy companies on this. We started by challenging them to cut the time it took to switch in half. And that has, I'm delighted to say, been delivered. You can now be with an energy supplier, a new energy supplier, in just 3 weeks. But as I remind them, let me remind you, my ambition has never been 3-week switching. It's for 24-hour switching. So we're only half the way there. And I want the industry to move as quickly as possible to reach the goal of 24-hour switching. And smart meters will be key to that ambition. But it's not just about switching times. People need to trust the system too. That is why Ofgem's new switching code of confidence, its tougher switching code of confidence, is so important. It's also why the new concept of collective switching I've been championing is so important. When I was Consumer Affairs Minister, I believed that collective purchase generally, not just for energy but other things, was important, and we trialled that when I was at the Department of Biz. And on day one in DEC, I said to my officials I wanted to push collective switching, and we've been working with you and others to do that. Because I think when people switch together, along with their neighbours and their friends, they can get a better deal. There's safety in numbers and greater purchasing power too. So I kick-started collective switching with the Cheaper Energy Together scheme in 2013, and since then the concept of collective switching has become mainstream. Local authorities are taking part in collective switches, local groups too. Newspapers like The Sun are doing it. But of course, MoneySavingExpert.com has also been very active. And I was very grateful for the advice that I've had. Also the critical friend advice that I've had from Martin and no doubt his team. Your big winter switches over the last few years have helped over 100,000 households onto a better deal. Overall, we've calculated people have saved over £20 million through collective switching. So these new business models can reach out particularly to more vulnerable people who don't trust and lost trust in the energy markets. So the 27 energy companies on the market and some fixed deals £100 cheaper than they were a year ago, my message is loud and clear. There's never been a better time to shop around, switch and save. By taking advantage of the best energy deals on the market, millions of people could save around £200 a year, and some could save even more. I know that MoneySavingExpert.com and the big energy saving network are spreading that message, but we have to do everything possible to reach people. As the early findings of the CMA investigation has confirmed, over 13 million households in the UK are paying over the odds for their energy because they have never switched. That's why last month I launched an incredibly ambitious government switching campaign. The Power to Switch campaign It is designed to wake people up to the money that they can save and turn them on to switching. And already we've seen a huge response. Tens of thousands of people looking for a better deal through the beanenergyshopper.com website alone. And I know from speaking to Martin that MoneySavingExpert.com is seeing significantly more traffic to your cheap energy club compared to last year. Of course, government advertising won't reach everybody. That's why it's great that this campaign has so many supporters and advocates. It's why the work of the Big Energy Saving Network is so important out in the community to spread this message. I'm really proud of the achievements of the Big Energy Saving Network in supporting vulnerable customers, whether through helping them find a better tariff or improving their energy efficiency, because I'm determined that competition and policy works for the most vulnerable, not just the most internet savvy. So I'm proud of the work that you have done, and with almost 100,000 vulnerable people helped in the first year of the network, that's a good, really good start, and we're aiming for another 100,000 this year. I'm committed to investing in this record of success. It's why I'm committed to securing further funding to make sure the Big Energy Saving Network can keep helping people stay warm for less. So let me turn my attention to how the government is supporting energy efficiency, the way to permanently cut bills. Energy efficiency is one of the main tools for reducing energy prices for consumers, and in many ways it's the poorest and most vulnerable who stand to benefit the most. Yesterday I published the first government fuel poverty strategy in over a decade, and it has energy efficiency at its heart, with a target to bring as many fuel-poor homes as reasonably practical up to an efficiency rating of Band C by 2030. And as a third of fuel-poor families live in rented homes, so for the first time we're going to make sure landlords improve drafty properties. But every home can benefit from energy efficiency and cut their bills permanently. That is why this government launched the first nationwide efficiency programme that everyone can access, the Green Deal, working alongside the energy company obligation. To date, over 1 million homes have been warmer, greener and cheaper to heat through the Green Deal and Eco. The Green Deal was a novel approach to promote energy efficiency and to mobilise private investment. Like any innovative scheme, there have been many lessons to learn early on, and we've worked with the supply chain to make the Green Deal easier for consumers to access and to get the incentives right. But the success of the Green Deal Home Improvement Fund shows we are getting closer. Under this scheme, the government provides vouchers for energy efficient home improvements such as new boilers, insulation in walls and double glazing. Many of the vouchers are being used to support substantial improvements, particularly solid wall insulation. The first two releases of GDHIF were worth almost £150 million, and we've already issued more than 25,000 households with vouchers since its launch in June last year. And today I can announce the launch of Release 3. From midday on Monday the 16th of March, people will be able to apply for new money-off vouchers worth up to £70 million, with up to 5,600 available to individual households in England and Wales to help with the cost of installing energy-saving home improvements. Households will be able to get up to 3,750 for installing solid wall insulation, and they will be able to get up to 1,250 for installing two other energy-saving measures from the list, a 25% increase, as we want to encourage people to think about making more than one improvement where those will benefit them. This is a first-come, first-served scheme, so I urge people to find out what it can do for you by calling the Energy Saving Advice Service in England and Wales, 0300 123 1234. Ladies and gentlemen, I've talked today about how we've turned around an energy market that wasn't working for the consumer, about how people can now more quickly switch energy supplier and save hundreds of pounds, and how they now have much more choice and competition, and how that's helping people to bring down bills, and how the drive for energy efficiency is bearing fruit, cutting bills for millions of people. That's quite a revolution for the consumer in energy since 2010. Okay, things are getting better, but I know there's still a lot more to do. My party, the Liberal Democrats, have set up plans for a green homes revolution with a bill in the second session of the next Parliament called the Green Homes Bill. This will have a programme which will see 10 million homes insulated over the next decade, cutting bills and helping people stay warm for less. A key part of this will be to introduce what I call the double bill cut, a policy to cut your energy bills and your council tax bills. Liberal Democrats will offer to anyone who improves their home's energy efficiency rating by 2 bands a 10-year council tax discount, yes, 10 years, of at least £100 a year. We believe such an incentive will encourage far more people than ever before to think seriously about cutting their energy bills through insulation, new boilers and the like. I've been frustrated in the coalition that we couldn't get agreement on such a policy with the Conservatives, but our manifesto will be clear: council tax cuts for energy bill cuts. And we will remain steadfast champions of competition in the energy market. Tied to no vested interests, we will not flinch from taking tough decisions, such as breaking up the big energy companies, if it means consumers will get a better deal. But to take a step of that magnitude, we would need proper evidence to proceed. The provisional findings and remedies of the Competition and Markets Authority, expected to be published before the summer, will be the seminal moment for the incoming government. And their final recommendations will be the seminal moment for energy markets in the next Parliament. Whoever holds the reins of power after general election must not let that moment slip. Ensuring electricity and gas bills are affordable for everyone should be too important to put party politics above following the advice of the independent experts. Thank you very much.
Thank you. What we're going to do now is I'm going to go to the floor for questions. Just a couple of questions from me before we start. You talk about 24-hour switching, something I would support very much. We currently have 17-day switching under the new faster switching scheme, but 2 weeks of that is a cooling off period. So if you go for true 24-hour switching, are you going to ditch the cooling off period?
We've already been talking about this with Energy UK. The issue is how that 2-week cooling off period works. Does it have to happen before you can switch, or can it happen during that process? So could you retrospectively, after 2 weeks, switch back? Now, we need to look through the details, but we've seen no barrier to preventing that happening.
So you'd switch in a day, but you'd still have a right for 2 weeks afterwards to come back if you needed to?
That's what I want to aim for.
Okay. The second question, Home Improvement Fund, very welcome. We know the last 30 million tranche went in 48 hours of the solid wall insulation. So this is £70 million on the same speed. You'd assume it would last 4 days. What's your prediction?
Well, I'm not going to apologise for having a popular scheme. And we want to get the money out the door because we want people's homes to be better insulated, because it's going to save carbon emissions, it's going to save people money, and I think it's absolutely the right thing to do. And what's really been interesting is we've developed...
It is a first mover advantage, though. It is the people who are ready and poised on this, which tends to be the more educated people, those people who are more literate about the way and more web savvy as well, who are therefore getting hold of it.
Let me just take issue with that, Martin.
Okay.
Our experience, the evidence is that this has been supplier-led. Actually, it's the supply chain's been knocking on doors, and they've been finding people to come forward. So it's not so much been demand-led. I'm not saying there aren't some of your customers who are obviously more savvy, and you wake them up, no doubt, with emails every morning to tell them to go to the GD HIF. I assume you do.
Be on the email next week, I can guarantee you that.
The suppliers have been knocking on doors, so I've seen no evidence to suggest that this is a skewed scheme to the better off at all.
Okay, so I'm going to put questions to the floor now. What I'm going to do first, we're going to alternate this between pre-submitted questions from Money Saving Expert users and then anybody else in the room who would like to ask a question. So we'll go Steve first and Laura will come second. If you introduce yourself at the start, Steve's one of us, but here we go. Steve, over to you.
Hi there, so it's Steve Novotny, and I've got a couple of questions from our users, one on vulnerable consumers and one on comparison sites. So Jason Ademola asks, I feel that the elderly is still penalised when it comes to getting the best deals, as an email address is required, and a large percentage of the elderly customers I assist have not got email addresses or access to the internet. Why is it still hard for the elderly to switch suppliers? The second question from Nick Wellington on comparison sites is simply, do you agree with MPs about price comparison sites behaving like backstreet traders?
Okay, well, for Jason's question first about vulnerable consumers, one of the reasons why I have pushed hard on things like collective switching business models and the big energy saving network is because I've been worried that vulnerable consumers have not been able to participate. I said in my remarks I wanted to make sure that it just wasn't just the internet savvy, because I'm absolutely aware that not just some retired people, but some other people don't have emails and aren't able to get the best deal. And as a government minister, I've got a responsibility to everyone, and particularly the most vulnerable. So that's why we've been doing that work. It's why we've been putting taxpayers' money behind the big energy saving network, supporting the wonderful voluntary sector, the CABs, Age Concern, and others who've been on the front line giving people advice. But I equally, I'm not going to roll back the clock. I think emails are a very important part of promoting competition. And it is worth noting that some of the reforms that we've seen, some of the lessons that we've seen from the CMA, I hope will reach out to more people and make sure the competition helps. And one thing that is quite important is that we do have telephone numbers. So if I can repeat 0300 123 1234, that is our telephone number that I'm sure everybody will be able to access. Then the comparison websites. Well, I was really pleased that Select Committee have been looking into this. It's something we've been working on, something we're working with Ofgem on. And so everybody understands that we are taking this very seriously. We've already seen the consultation on strengthening the code of confidence, and I think that's going to be very important. An underreported fact is in the 2013 Energy Act, I legislated to give Ofgem the power to regulate what are called third-party intermediaries, which includes price comparison websites. So if it turns out the strengthened code isn't good enough, we have got the measures there, the legislative powers to take action to crack down on any price comparison website that isn't behaving. But I know Martin's a particular expert on this area, and although your website isn't accredited, there's a very good reason for that, and maybe you want to talk about that.
Well, we're not accredited, and we can't be because our underlying data provider is from somebody else, even though the front end and what people get and the results come from us, which I think is something that needs to be changed, but Ofgem hasn't updated that. On price comparison sites behaving like backstreet traders, well, my frustration in the evidence session that went in Parliament is we asked to give evidence, we were told no, we're only looking for the bad guys. And Money Saving Expert has always defaulted to all tariffs. We don't even have a selection where you can choose to only look at tariffs that pay us. Not only that, but the accusation that commission is hidden, well, we've always been upfront about it, told people when they get it, told people how much. We get about £60 on a dual fuel switch. We give our users £30. We have to pay our suppliers, and we probably make about £11 per switch. Very open about that now. And my frustration with that report, where they blanketed all comparison sites as the same, was they're not all the same. So it isn't an industry issue, it's a specific issue on specific comparison sites. What I would say though, and I'd love, I suspect, and in fact I know there's another question coming, but the biggest problem we have of misleading information on comparison sites, if you examine the difference between the cheapest that pays with the sites that just do it that way and the very cheapest, it's normally, sometimes it's nothing, if it is, it's £10, £15 a year, it's a relatively small amount. Is the Ofgem enforcing the personal projection in the answers? We're going to break rank with this because we think it's bad for consumers, which means it assumes you will stay on the tariff you are on. So if you've got a fixed tariff that ends in 3 months' time, it tells you an average price across the year, including the go-to tariff afterwards. And that's what we are enforced, it's lucky we're not accredited, forced to give us an answer. It's misleading, it exaggerates the amount of savings, it's wrong, we get more complaints about that than anything else, and it's an Ofgem rule, and even though across the industry people have said this isn't the way to do it, Ofgem has made it even stronger in its comparison code. So I think there's a real problem going on in the industry.
The MPs didn't pick that point up, did they?
No, the MPs didn't, because the MPs were getting close to an election and wanted to get a nice little bit of politics by giving a spat over what they saw as big fish. I mean, I wasn't there, it would have been a different session had I been, frankly, because what they did was ran the risk of discouraging people to switch. The bigger problem is energy companies charging too much. Price comparisons misbehaving is a problem, but it's nowhere near as big. Martin, I think it was a mixed, confusing
Can I say I'm really pleased you said that, because one of the issues in switching and therefore competition was the years of doorstep mis-selling.
Yeah.
I mean, I do 2 surgeries a week in my constituency and spend 5 to 8 hours face to face talking to my constituents. When I was in opposition during those years of doorstep mis-selling, I had quite a significant number of people who'd switched and got a worse deal, and often they were the elderly, and that's why doorstep mis-selling had to go out. But doorstep mis-selling did huge damage to people's confidence and trust in the energy suppliers, and we're still sort of living with the echoes of that, and therefore it is a bit damaging if we sort of paint all price comparison websites as bad, just as you said, because actually many of them actually do a good job. And we do need to make sure that people have much more confidence switching if we're going to hold the energy companies to account.
Well, I won't come back on it, but I agree. I think I agree wholeheartedly. I think it was a difficult report that came out. When you look at the worst in the market and you write a report that's based on the behaviour of the worst in the market, that's not necessarily a fair picture of what everybody is doing. So Laura will take your question next. Simon, I'll come to you after we've gone through some more user questions.
Sorry, it's Laura Shannon from the Mail on Sunday, and actually that touched on my question, which was going to be, do you feel that with the criticism of the price comparison websites that it's damaged people's appetite to switch, especially the people that have never switched before and don't engage regularly with this topic? And second of all, and Martin touched on it as well, do you have concerns about Ofgem's ability to regulate effectively?
Well, I don't know if it's damaged confidence, and one of the reasons why Ofgem has taken the measures it has to strengthen the code of confidence is to make sure it doesn't. And it's clear that we need to pay real attention. It's one of the reasons why we legislated in the 2013 Energy Act. I think far more damage was done in sort of the last decade by doorstep mis-selling. I think that really did undermine, and that's the thing we're repairing. But I think if we are tough on the comparison websites in a fair way, making sure we do distinguish in the way Martin talked about, then I think it shouldn't get in the way of the switching that we need to see. I mean, essentially, people go shopping certainly every week and most days. They're used to thinking about who's giving them the best deal. But in utility services, particularly where there's competition, they do that less. And that actually undermines competition. So we're trying to encourage people. Given that energy bills are quite a big slug of people's expenditure, we want to try to change the culture so people do shop for energy. That's why Ofgem's website, Be an Energy Shopper, is named like that. People need to start thinking about how they can save bills, how they can use the benefits of markets to get much better deals. That's what this is all about.
And the Ofgem? Faith in Ofgem?
Listen, we've given Ofgem the powers now in the 2013 Energy Act. They will review it, and that they will listen, I hope, to criticisms that people like MoneySavingExpert.com are making. Ofgem want to serve people, and I think in many ways they've shown teeth in the last few years, where they put big fines on energy companies where they've misbehaved, and I think that should be reassuring for consumers. One of the things I did in the Energy Act 2013 was make sure those fines went back to consumers. Previously, the fines had gone to the Treasury. Crazy system. I wanted to make sure consumers got the benefit of that compensation.
It does feel a little bit like it's a cycle of a fine, a slap on the wrist, but nothing changes in terms of the culture. So they continue to do something wrong. Fair enough, they pay for it in the end, but who's paid for it consumer-wise?
Well, the key thing is competition. And the big six have been losing huge numbers of customers, millions of customers. And that's the way, you've got two tools, haven't you? You've got regulations. That's now getting tougher compared to what it used to be. We've never seen the levels of fines as we have in the last few years from Ofgem. That's to be welcomed. But you also use competition as the tool. And that's been proving very, very effective. And one of the reasons why I so strongly support the Independent Competition and Markets Authority investigation is if it finds there's abuse of market power, it has some very strong teeth to act, and I would strongly support it, as I made clear.
I don't know if you heard this morning, Ofgem banned Scottish Power for selling for 12 days. What's your reaction to that?
Welcome it. It's their job to...
12 days long enough?
Well, I haven't studied the case. I mean, you have an independent regulator for a reason.
I can tell you, Scottish Power and Empower complaints are horrendous. over 50% of their users say they're poor. We get people who over a year after they've left are getting bills even though they're given meter readings. We get people who are panicking and being put in penury by Scottish Power and Empower specifically. I can't tell you how many people, I know there's a question in later, wanted to ask you about this. So I have to say the reaction I've had this morning when I tweeted about Scottish Power only being banned for 12 days was, why isn't it longer? Why will they be allowed to again? What's going to improve afterwards?
My understanding, but I'm not, it's only just come out this morning, and the independent regulator doesn't tell the Secretary of State exactly what it does every day, is that if things aren't improved, then they can come back for more. And that's often the way these sanction regimes work. They give people a chance to put things right, and if not, they'll come after them for more. So if Scottish Power doesn't get its act together, my understanding Ofgem will then come again.
I'm going to stop monopolising, and Yazine has got some more Money Savers questions here.
Hi, Yassine Dean. I have 3 questions for you, one a personal one and 2 complaints from our forum users and one from Twitter. So about your switching, Malk Naskar has asked, Mr. Davey, can you tell us how often you have switched your own energy suppliers, and if you have, how easy did it appear to be, and were the transactions smooth and error-free? And a complaint from one of our forum users, H. Hearted, asked, why are you doing nothing to bring the worst suppliers for complaints into line? Npower and Scottish Power are shambles, but nothing is being done to put them right. Do you think a ban on taking on new domestic customers may focus the mind? And from Catherine on Twitter, she's asked, it's great to speed up supply transfer times, but what about final bills, credits and meter reading disputes?
Well, first of all, I've switched twice in the last 3 years, I think it is, and I've done it both times through collective switches. Both as a champion of collective switch, I wanted to show that I used it, and my first one switch was with the big London Energy switch, I think it was called, and I saved over 200 quid, and then I switched with the big deal, which is, sorry guys.
It's fine.
I believe. Next time it will be with you, okay?
To be absolutely honest, it was slightly more expensive once you're taking the cash back into account.
Okay, so I've switched twice, and both times it was really simple. It was really, really simple, and there was no problems at all.
I should say on collective switching, the one thing we've noticed is if we compare who's doing a normal switch by doing a comparison compared to who's doing it when we do a collective switch, it massively increases the number of first-time switchers, up to 75% in the last collective switch. So it is very strong for market disruption. The trusted intermediary bit does work.
And I'm really evangelical about collective switching. Not only does it get some of the first-time switchers who otherwise probably wouldn't do it, and within that will be some very vulnerable consumers. And when we did the cheap energy together, I only put one stipulation on the grants, that you had the people getting the grants had to reach out to the fuel poor, because that's who need to be benefiting from switching. But it actually has a big indirect effect on competition. Some of the big energy companies, they sort of hold on to their customer base, but collective switching opens quite a significant number of customers up to the competitors in one go. So that's one of the reasons why you've seen some of the smaller energy suppliers grow more quickly than they otherwise would have done. Collective switching is disruptive. And the big energy companies don't like it, so I think that's good for it. You asked me 2 other questions though. The worst suppliers, Npower, Scottish Power. Well, I had Npower in about 6 months ago, I think it was. We can give you the precise figure first time, because their record was shocking. I mean, they were right at the bottom of all the customer service tables. They were not improving quick enough. Ofgem had been after them. Ofgem had actually threatened a complete marketing ban. They wouldn't be able to market for many months. And so Ofgem was on their case. I wanted to make it clear personally, and had Paul Massara in to go through what their plan was to improve things. Scottish Power we've heard about just now. I mean, we do really take this seriously. Obviously, Ofgem and the Ombudsman are sort of the front line to deal with these complaints. But again, it's one of the reasons why competition is so important. If you look at the surveys of customer service done by Which, done by CAB, and I'm sure there's one done by MoneySavingExpert.com, but if you look at those tables, the big 6 are right at the bottom. Npower is right at the bottom of the big 6. And it's the smaller suppliers we've been encouraging that are actually competing, not just on price, but on customer service. So, you know, competition is one of the key ways of doing this, as well as strengthening the arm of Ofgem. And you talked about the last question about final bills and the errors there. I think that's really important. If you look at the complaints going to the Energy Ombudsman, 82% of complaints are about bills, 82%. And one of the reasons why I think we need to get tough on that, but one of the reasons why we need to roll out smart meters is because smart meters, we believe, will completely reduce the billing complaints. From the early learnings, there's been about 1 million smart meters in non-domestic and domestic rolled out so far. They're the first generation of smart meters, but our results from that early learning shows that the satisfaction rate of consumers with smart meters is significantly higher than those with analog meters, and it's partly due to the fact that the bills are accurate.
I think just to say, the real message that we get is when you go for 24-hour switching, which we approve, you've got to include final bills credit and meter read disputes within that process, and a process that's got to be dealt with quickly so people can move on. Simon, your question.
Two questions, if I may. First is about prices. Now, the problem we have, people who are paying too much are all those on variable tariffs. So would it be simply the answer to ban variable tariffs?
Do you want to do your second one, then we'll come
And the second question is about misbehaving energy companies. The fact is, I get more complaints from readers about being badly treated by the energy companies. You know, it's not so much the price, it's they're ignored. I had a reader last week, a 92-year-old reader, whose billing went from £200 to £2,000. She spent about 6 months and her daughter with British Gas trying to sort it out, got nowhere. It took me calling up British Gas, pointing out that it was complete nonsense, and it's sorted in a day. Now, these things can be sorted quickly, but none of the big companies seem capable of doing so or have common sense about it.
On the variable point, I'm not into regulations from a secretary or even indeed from an independent regulator that are banning the tariffs. I think it is important that people are competing. But you're absolutely right. The analysis shows that people on variable tariffs over time tend to get poorer deals than those who switch regularly on fixed price. It's one of the reasons why we're doing everything that we're doing to encourage people to look at what's out and the best price. I think banning variable tariffs is not the way to go, but I think what we are doing, faster switching, simpler bills, stronger codes of confidence for the price comparison websites, all that is the right way to go. Misbehaving energy companies. Now, in my surgeries regularly, I do get exactly the sorts of things you're talking about. I've had several examples of energy companies treating my constituents really badly, and nothing makes me more cross. And one looks at all the different ways of sorting them out, whether it's reference to the Ombudsman, whether it's getting the regulator involved. Of course, I get involved as the constituency MP. It can be quite effective sometimes when you're Secretary of State and their local MP to get things sorted. But it shouldn't be like that. It should not be like that. And that's one of the reasons why we've been wanting to strengthen the arm of Ofgem, but also competition. And I make no apology for coming back to competition. We've got to have much greater choice out there, and I think we've delivered on that with a massive increase we've seen in independent suppliers. We've got to support them. One of the things we did last summer was we got all the small suppliers in, and we talked to them to say, what is it you want? And the reason we did that was because my department previously talked to the big six and had a representative of the small suppliers in. My department was not listening to the needs of the small suppliers, and I didn't want that to continue because I see the small suppliers as the future. I've said publicly that I want to see the market share of the small suppliers go from 10% to 30%, because that will really shake these people up who are misbehaving, who are treating people badly, my constituents, your readers. Competition will do that. And so I wanted to make sure we took every barrier out of the way, even before the CMA reported. I hope the CMA will give us a roots up 18-month analysis with really hard data. But we haven't, just because the CMA is happening, we haven't sort of stood still. We're doing everything we can. And I think the small supplier conversations we're having now are ensuring that new policies take their concerns into account, so we're not putting any barriers in the way. And frankly, if there are any small suppliers listening, if there's any other barriers you've got, come and see me, because I want to take them down, because I want competition.
Just an aside, one of the interesting things, there needs to be something done about changing indirect debits, because you had a 92-year-old reader. I was doing a roadshow where an old chap who was partially deaf came to me, and his direct debit had been increased from, it was something like £80 a month to £180 a month. And he said, I don't know why, and I don't know what to do about it. And I asked, what did the supplier say? And he said, oh, I haven't called them. I said, why don't you call them? He said, well, I'm a bit deaf and I'm a bit scared. And so I said, right, get me on the phone. And of course, it was sorted in, and they knew it was me as well. The guy clocked my voice, and then I said, I want a gratuity payment for them. He said, how much do you want to give them, Mr. Lewis? It was that, you see, it should always work that way. But the problem is, ultimately, there are many people out there who won't make that call and who just do it because they're scared. And there's no complaint system in the world that fixes that, apart from better systems that say this can't be right. A doubling of direct debits like that can't be right.
The way we've got to do it, Martin, is use every tool in the book.
Yeah.
Competition, regulation. I would then go back to the big energy saving network because I'm really proud of it. It's got no coverage at all, but it's actually helping 100,000 people last year. They're going to help more than 100,000 people this year. Ensuring that we have given training to the CAB, to Age Concern and to others to be on the front line, to look after the most vulnerable is actually one of the things I'm proud of. I don't know how much we spent, probably about 2 million quid over the last 3 years. Best £2 million I spent as Secretary of State because it's helping the most vulnerable. And that's who we've got to be thinking about every time. The 92-year-old granny. I mean, my grandmother, my late grandmother, my lovely late grandmother who died when she was 90, I was, for a whole set of reasons, I was the person who looked after the most and dealt with a care home, bills and all the rest of it. And when I look at public policy, whether it's when I was Post Office Minister thinking about the importance of the Post Office, whether it's energy bills, when I was Consumer Affairs Minister, I look at problems through the eyes of my late grandmother. Because if systems work for an elderly lady who's got poor sight, who's frail, who's got osteoporosis and all the rest of it, then they're working for everybody. That should be the test that the energy companies have to meet.
I'm going to move now to Wendy, who's from to talk some more Money Savers questions on Green Deal and Home Improvement Fund.
Yes, hi there. So I've got 3 questions. One is from Paul Smith. Why are insulation grants for walls only available for those insulating 51% or more of their walls? Second is from Chris Ewer on renewables. Why aren't more government grants available to encourage households to install heat pumps? And finally, from Philip Dune on heating oil. Whenever the price of electric or gas increases, members of Parliament very quickly denounce the rises as profiteering and threaten all sorts of measures against the power companies. Never ever have I heard a word about the exorbitant price of central heating oil. Living in a rural area with no mains gas is our only alternative. Why is heating oil never mentioned when power prices are discussed?
First question, that rule in the GDHIF, it's been there for a good reason, because if we're giving taxpayers' money to people to use solid wool, we want to make sure that they're doing as many walls as possible. And you know, retrofitting Britain's leaky houses, we don't want to do it wall by wall. We want to sort of really go for it. And the 51% rule there in the GDHIF was there for that purpose. But what I will do is I'll go away and look at it, because it may be that in some cases it just doesn't right, and if it's a barrier, because you could have examples, I guess, I'm just thinking on my feet, where it's difficult to put solid wall insulation on free walls because of various reasons, because there's some quite, you know.
I'll tell you sneakily that Wendy wanted this question because she's in a similar position, and you couldn't do other walls, could you?
All right. Well, I'm aware.
It wasn't her question, though. But
well, I'm aware of that because there are some, particularly in heritage properties, in properties in conservation areas. Sometimes it can be difficult, and you'd only be able to do one wall. So if it, you know, I'll take it away and look at it.
It should perhaps be at least half of the walls you could do, as opposed to half of the walls. Yeah. Perhaps that would be a more sensible way to structure the rule.
But we'll look at it. But it was there for a good reason. It wasn't there because we're daft and trying to restrict. We don't want people to insulate. But you can see why. But we'll look at it. On renewables, why aren't there incentives particularly for heat pumps? Well, first of all, we do have the renewable heat incentive, which is a world first, and you know that is actually going relatively well. We need to keep it under review because it is an innovative policy. One thing I've said yesterday as part of the Liberal Democrat manifesto, we want to reform the Green Deal so that the Green Deal isn't just about energy efficiency, but it's also about renewable heat and renewable electricity. We want to turn it into a green loan scheme, and that will give, I think, greater access to some of these renewable heat technologies to people who have got less money and who can't pay up front. So I think it is important we develop policy in these innovative areas and we ensure that people on lower incomes can access renewable heat. In a funny sort of way, that links to the last question about heating oil, because when we think about renewable heat, at the moment the biggest rollout is for rural areas that are off gas grid, where renewable heat calculations make an awful lot more sense, because it is expensive to heat your home off gas grid, because you're either using electricity to heat, which is more expensive than gas, or using solid fuel or using oil. And one of the things that came through in our fuel poverty strategy, and all the work we did that, following from the new measurement of fuel poverty that Professor John Hills came up with in his independent review, was that some of the deepest fuel poverty is in off-gas grid areas. For the very reason the questioner says, is that the heating oil and other non-gas ways of heating can be far more expensive. So it's something that we've really taken on board. In the fuel poverty strategy we published yesterday, we published our first go at a map of all the properties around the UK that are off gas grid. We were refining that, working with the industry, working with the Fuel Poverty Advisory Group. We want to get a much better understanding of where the off gas grid problem is. We've already started initiatives, so we've got the Central Heating Fund, which we think is one of the ways we will improve energy efficiency and reduce bills of people in fuel poverty who are in off gas grid homes. But let me not duck the specific question that lay behind that gentleman's answer. Actually, OFT, before I actually changed it when I was Competition Minister to the Competition and Markets Authority, OFT did a review of that market. They found that in the vast majority of the country it was competitive. There were some questions in very remote rural areas where there was only one supplier. But the vast majority of the country, OFT found that there was competition. And one of the things we've done is we've really encouraged collective purchase of oil. Not just collective switching, but collective purchase. And we've had a lot of oil heating clubs. Actually, they've been around for a while in some areas, but we've encouraged that and supported that, so people can use collective purchasing power to help them. But it is a real issue.
What about the regulatory regime on heating oil?
Well, one of the reasons why we haven't brought it into Ofgem is because of the OFT report. I know there's an argument the Labour Party are proposing that it comes under Ofgem. It's a reasonable question to ask, but before you put something into regulation, you've got to have an argument about why it needs regulating. And the OFT report did not give us the evidence to do that.
I'm going to Summit and then Emily, I think.
Ed, how are you? Hope you're well. Today is obviously about the domestic, but let's talk about business. I know we've done a lot on that. Two things. Actually, from the business side, and you know this, the reputation isn't as bad in terms of the energy suppliers. But business switching is something I know you've been looking into. Where do you think that lies? Are we doing enough with business switching? And also, why do you think such a disparity between the way suppliers treat business customers and the way they're treating domestic customers?
Well, there have been some problems in the business market, let's be clear, and we've acted on that. There were things like rollover contracts, which were notorious. And I've met a number of particularly smaller businesses who've had a pretty raw deal from their energy supplier. So I don't want anyone to listen to this thinking that I think everything's hunky-dory in that market. I really don't think that at all. And we need to watch them, because some of the small businesses really need the support. And there's an issue whether they've been getting enough support. And we've certainly acted, but maybe room to do more. Equally, I think we ought to have done more on energy efficiency for small businesses. We had hoped that the Green Deal would have a non-domestic element to it, but as we know, the Green Deal has had a few teething problems, and so we need to try to relook at that to make sure that the finances are there. So there's been some improvement in the market, but I think there's still, particularly for SMEs, I think there's more to do.
And Emily.
Emily Gosden from The Telegraph. I'm interested to hear you say that you think banning variable tariffs is not the way to go. Obviously, we've heard some quite influential figures like Dieter Helm suggesting there may be a need for some sort of backstop regulated standard tariff. So are you opposed to that? Do you think switching is really the only answer and a sufficient answer? And secondly, if switching does take off on some grand unprecedented scale, how do you see that panning out for the kind of offers available in the market? Would you accept that perhaps the cheapest deals will disappear and the variable tariffs will come down and things will just all converge in the middle?
Well, the one thing I would advise both politicians and journalists to do is to guess markets. The markets are dynamic, and I certainly aren't going to second guess that. Dieter Helm's arguments in all these areas are very interesting, but what I'm keen to do is to listen to what the Competition and Markets Authority say. And if the Competition and Markets Authority argue for backstop regulatory powers or something like that, based on a 18-month investigation, then I'll go with those recommendations. So, you know, there's a huge range of tools that are available for the Competition and Markets Authority. They are independent, they are the experts, they're looking at this in the depth that has never been looked at before. I think if you read their papers that we've seen so far, they're ultimately pretty supportive of the drive to switching. That's what they want. My impression, I mean, I'm not going to put words into the CMA's mouth, and they're independent, and we'll see what they say. But certainly, it's very difficult to read their report and come to a conclusion that switching isn't a really important part of the future framework.
So I'm just going to, as we're running short of time, I'm just going to proceed. Forgive me, the ones who are going to ask this question. A couple of users' questions before we finish. I think that's the right way to go. Terry effectively asks, his standing charge has gone up. He seems to be penalised for being a low energy user. What do you think about that with the constant increase in standing charges? And Foot Guy says, what can the government do to force the energy providers to cut prices proportionately when their wholesale prices fall in a similar speed to what they do when they raise prices and they put them up?
Well, on standing charges, the Ofgem and the Retail Market Review looked at this in some detail. And they looked at whether or not they should get rid of standing charges and all the rest of it. They concluded that wouldn't be in consumers' interests. But I can understand what the gentleman says, but there are some tariffs out there that he may get a better deal on. So that's the first thing, and maybe he needs to get some advice from MoneySavingExpert.com on if there's a better deal for a low energy user, because there are some tariffs that actually are designed for low energy users.
It actually gets a little bit complicated if you've got variable usage, which is the problem, but we have a guide called No Standing Charge Tariffs, which explains that as opposed to on a comparison
That's
side.
a better answer than I gave.
There we go.
With the wholesale prices, I mean, that was a question.
The wholesale prices, yeah. Well,
this has been
why don't they cut them when they go down, like they raise them when they go up?
This is the so-called rocket and feather issue, that they rocket up when wholesale prices are going down. They just come down slowly like a feather when they're going the other direction. I think it's a serious issue. It's one of the issues why I asked for the first ever competition assessment by Ofgem, which led to the referral to the Competition and Markets Authority. The Competition and Markets Authority are looking at it in detail. It's been looked at before, and there's a few years ago the evidence didn't seem to stack up. There's a bit more evidence now that this is a serious problem. I would say, wouldn't I, that competition is beginning to be an answer to this, because effectively this is about hedging. And if you're a big energy supplier, you've got 7 million customers, you're looking to make sure you're hedging and smoothing the prices for the customers. Because if you just give them on the spot market for wholesale prices is changing all the time. I mean, last year it went down by 50%, then went up, and it went down again and has gone up. It's gone all over the place, which is why Labour's policy of immediate following through is just economic nonsense, but not for the first time. So the hedging issue is why it's there. But because we've now got more competition, you've got different companies competing on hedging strategies. So you're seeing some companies that aren't buying 2 years ahead or 3 years ahead, they're actually buying much shorter. So that's giving customers more choice of in situations when wholesale prices are going up and down. So competition is, again, I'm afraid, part of the answer to that. But if there has been malpractice, the CMA have certainly got the experts and the ability to get to the evidence, get to the bottom of it, to see if there has been wrongdoing. And if there has been wrongdoing, they have serious teeth to act. That is why it's such an important development in energy policy.
Do you think people will believe them? This is the problem. We have had so many of these reports that say there isn't unfair profits going on in the energy market. The public don't believe them. And because the public don't believe them, that means there's no trust in the various reports that come out. There is a real disjoint between official reports and public sentiment. How are you going to fix that?
Well, I think trust is a big issue in society at large, whether it's about trust of bankers, trust of politicians, trust of energy markets, trust of journalists. There's a trust gap in modern society. So you're asking actually quite a big philosophical question. I would, of course, argue that people like MoneySavingExpert.com and the Big Energy Saving Network are there to help bridge that gap. But one of the reasons why this particular report is different, and why I call on everyone to get behind it, it's by an independent group of experts. Now, maybe people will be cynical, but these guys are completely independent. Britain has one of the best, if not the best, competition regime in the world. If there is a problem, these guys will get after it. And I think one of the reasons why I was so keen to establish it is because I think it's one of the mechanisms that can rebuild the trust that has been lost. This, because it's a roots-up analysis, will enable people to say, well, at long last, we have got to the bottom of this. Some people will always be cynical, but I really have a lot of faith in this, and I urge other people to look at the strength and independence of this investigation.
Ed Davey, Secretary of State for Energy, thank you very much for coming. Cheers. Thanks, Ed. Much appreciated.